Hello folks, Larry here again with Curio Mechanics. Today we're going to do a kind of a short tutorial on working with your files and some basics on using Linux day to day. First thing we're going to do is just go in and find a file browser. You can use several different ones. Dolphin's very popular, so that's the one I've run up here. The first concept to touch in is the home folder. Every user on a Linux system will have their own home folder, and it's kind of just your place to store stuff, and we'll kind of touch on why that is in a little bit. But it is a pretty familiar structure. You've got different categories that you can get into. There's documents and pictures, music, all of which are kind of standardized these days in some sense amongst all operating systems. They might have slightly different labels, but they generally work the same. But this is where you want to save everything, so where you want to do your day-to-day work. And basically, there are different ways to view it, different things you can do. There is a trash, like a recycle bin on Windows, but you can, when you delete things, they normally would go directly into the trash. But then there's a kind of a larger underlying structure. It's often called a root partition. But just kind of pointing out that right now you want to stick with your home folder. And when you do backups, that's usually the first place a backup will look to go, because that has most of what makes you you. And the concept I wanted to bring up is permissions. The permission to your home folder is generally the least restrictive. So that's where you're going to have the most flexibility, but not unlimited. There's still some gates in place to keep you from stepping on anything important. But there are, like I say, more underlying things in your root partition. Until you know what you're doing, I would just leave those alone. In rare occasions, you may want to go in there and kind of mess with it, but your home folder is just another folder in that root partition. And then, like I say, there's a separate area for each user that's on the system. So, but this is just kind of me looking around, but there's your home and there's your stuff. The most programs will default to saving it there. So regardless of where you're at, usually you'll wind up in the home folder. The other folders each kind of have a specific purpose, or directories, I guess is another word for it, on your hard drive. Stick in your home. I'm going to keep beating that into the tutorial here, simply because of, like I say, restrictions. And this is a script file, which is just a kind of a plain text file that you can use to automate some stuff. But by default, not everything you save will have the ability to execute. There are 3 categories of permissions: read, write, and execute. And then 3 groups or groupings of users. There's the owner of the file, the same group that the owner belongs to, and then anybody. And this is me kind of fiddling around in the Dolphin dialog to change those permissions. So the reason I'm even bringing this up is sometimes you may need to install something or download a file or do external stuff that you've imported, and it may not work. And that's because a lot of times by default, things that can do stuff may not have the ability to execute. So you may have to manually okay that just to tell the system that it's all right. And this is going to be me just kind of doing a quick listing to show you how those directories actually work for the curious. But every physical device will get its own assignment, and then within that naming structure there are sub names for every partition. So everything's kind of broken down logically. You've got the device, then you've got the partitions on it. And then in Linux, you can actually mount that or put it wherever you want. In Windows, you get drive letters, C, D, E, F, and so on. But that's not necessarily the case with Linux. You can put everything all your hard drives in a different folder. Say you mount them in your home directory. That's perfectly fine. And Mounting is the term for it. This is me using the cmod command, CHMOD, which is simply the ability to change the permissions from a command line, which the command line is kind of scary. But what I'm pointing out here is usually if you have a command you're trying to use, you can type the command and then space and 2 dashes help, or MAN for manual, space, and then the actual command, and that will bring up usually a little bit more thorough bit of information. But so now that we've looked at how to use the chmod command, or I've read the directions and now I understand what I'm trying to accomplish, I can use that to specify file permissions even more granularly than with using the dialogues. And like I say, you don't need to really understand how it works at this point, just that it does. But you can add and remove specific permissions for every object on Linux. And by default, your user account isn't going to have unlimited access. Even if you put something there, it doesn't mean that you have the right to step on a system file or run something crazy without telling it it's okay. So I wrote a little test script, and this is me taking away the permission to run it. So this is just to kind of show you an example of what it looks like when you can't do something. It will just say no. So even though I wrote it, I saved it in my home folder, it's not going to be allowed to execute. In this case, I have read and write to it, but I do not have execute. So it just says, nope, permission denied. So I can use another command and add that permission back on and say, nope, it's okay, go ahead and run it. And so now when I execute it, ta-da, it will go ahead and run and say, hello world, oh boy. But like I say, I'm touching on it because it can be a stumbling block for a lot of early, newer users, just that you're not aware that you don't have unlimited permission. There is some accounts that will allow you to do things less restrictively, but even those, they're hard to get to on purpose. The concept with Linux is what they call the least permission required. But now this is me using the system to install software, and you can find what you need, and there's quite a few different categories, quite a few different pieces of software. In this case, I'm going to just install a random terminal thing. So I searched by category, and then I will hit the install button. And Linux is aware of what it takes to run it, but oh look, it's still asking my permission to do a system level change. So this is actually using your account password. It just kind of wants to make sure you really mean business when you're dealing with the system itself. And that's kind of the nice part is, or it lends more security and stability to not just have unfettered access across the entire system. It will always be cognizant of the fact that there's an underlying framework that may affect other users and could even cause system instability. But so we hit install, and it takes care of the magic and takes care of the permissions. So lo and behold, there's our new terminal program, which, okay, great. We can use it. And again, by using the software package manager, Linux has taken care of all the heavy lifting of putting it where it needs to go, making sure it can go. And you can use this to both install and uninstall. So in this case, I'm using the package manager called Discover, but most of them are actually pretty flexible and pretty easy to use. So if you don't need to use manual techniques, I would always recommend you try to find a package manager and use that. This is also using what's called a repository. Each flavor of Linux has a little bucket that the developers put stuff in that's already tested and customized and kind of known to work and set up to work. Sometimes you may want to get something from a third party that may or may not be in that repository. I'm simply mentioning that they exist So again, if you're trying to figure out why you can't, install the latest version of Flappy Bird, it may or may not be in the repository for the flavor of Linux that you're using. But again, it's usually worth the trouble of getting that package manager to work instead of trying to do it yourself until you get comfortable. Now, once you're more comfortable, you have actually quite a bit more flexibility and capability and power at your fingertips. But you don't have to be afraid of it. There's several layers of protection to keep you from hurting yourself. But it's still, if you don't know what you're doing, don't screw with it. Now, this is me bringing up what's called Synaptics Package Manager. This is slightly different, a little more granular. It still works the same. It is a software manager, but it lets you see things in a little bit different view and more under the hood. So say you have to have a support library or there's something like that. This will show you what's already installed as far as the supporting packages or something they call dependencies. If a program has to have this or that library, it will be dependent on it. But all you need to do is to find the whatever object you're looking for, be it software or a support library or something your cousin Eddie wrote. You can just find it and then check it on or off. So if it causes problems, you can get back in there and just turn it off or get rid of it. So the Synaptics Package Manager I find to be a little bit easier to use for system level dependencies, but again, with the normal Discover any package manager worth its salt, it will tell you what extra needs to be done and usually take care of it for you. But this is me back into a normal file manager. Now this one's, I believe, a PC manager. So just an example, in Windows, you've kind of always got Explorer as your main tool. But in Linux, it's perfectly happy running 83 different flavors. It doesn't really care what type of package or what type of file manager you're trying to run. It will provide slightly different user interface and flexibility. But for me, Discover, I find just a little bit weird. Sometimes it will take a single click and go with it. So I prefer something that gives me a little bit more manual control for, say, selecting multiple files. But it's a matter of preference. You do what you want. But this is me showing you that you can do different views. You can sort columns. And, of course, we're back in our home directory, so this is where all my junk lives. But there's a high level of flexibility for finding and organizing your files, whether you put them in separate folders or, you want to use this for that. But there's nothing stopping you from putting your music in your videos and your videos in your music. It's all personal choice. But I just wanted to, again, show you that you can use a different package manager or a different file manager and find one that you like. Last thing to point out is that when you use the system level software tools, it also becomes aware of updates. So in this case, there looks like some new things that Linux wants to update. So it just gave me a little icon in the corner and said, hey, please update these. So go ahead and click update and ask me again for my password because it wants to make sure I'm not just doing this randomly or that I'm at least aware that system files are being affected. So that's a crash course. I hope it was helpful. Thanks for watching and enjoy your day.